The illusion that we fall for time and again. We imagine that evil comes like fully advertised as such. Like evil people look like Anton LaVey.
Horns,
yeah.
Right,
you know what I mean? The weaker the leader, the more evil that leader will be. So Mike Johnson, everyone's like, oh, Mike Johnson's such a nice guy. Well, I know Mike Johnson, but he's a weak man. And that's the man you should be afraid of.
Yes, there is something going on. Before we even go into that,
I'm sure you're all as disgusted as I am with witnessing the flying of the Ukrainian flags on the U.S. Congressional Chamber. I want to be clear that the only flag that should ever be flown in our Congress, on our floor, in our chamber, should be the American flag. You know, I wish that so many of them who supported the Ukrainian funding for their border and for their country cared as much about America to fly proudly the American flag when we vote on border security like H.R. 2. It is a sad day in Congress. It is a sad day in America when people proudly fly the flag of a foreign nation in our United States chamber. I am disgusted by this. And the fact that the Sergeant at Arms and others did not ensure the decorum, I think, is one of those things that needs to be followed up on. I will continue to fight for the American people. I will continue to fight for the Angel families. I will continue to look at what is best to prioritize America, Americans, and American interest. The firm won today. And we need more constitutionalists and more fighters here in D.C.
according to this tweet, weak people just become a host for evil. An open, empty building that evil occupied possesses even, and that is exactly what is happening to Mike Johnson. That is absolutely crazy what Mike Johnson is doing, but it is not because he is evil, it is because he is weak and therefore susceptible to evil. It is a meaningful distinction that I have noticed. This is Tucker Carlson calling out Mike Johnson. He is receiving massive backlash on social media after this bill was approved, and a lot of people were seen with Ukrainian flags waving on this location. It is to clearly tell you what is going on. If you are not subscribed to this channel, please endeavor to do that. It will do you no harm if you share out this video.
By the way.
No, I mean, people don't say that because they're worried about getting punished. They're worried about
Right.
someone putting kiddie porn on their computer.
Right.
Members of Congress are terrified of the intel agencies.
I'm not guessing at that. They've told me that, including people on the Intel Committee, including people who run the Intel Committee, the people whose job it is to oversee and keep in line these enormous, secretive agencies whose budgets we can't even know. They're black budgets. They're the parents. The agencies are the children. They're afraid of the agencies. That's not compatible with democracy. Democracy is a really simple system, even representative democracy like ours. The people rule. They do so through elections. They express their preference through voting. They send their people to the capital city to run the government on their behalf. Whenever you have unelected people who are not accountable to anyone making the biggest decisions, you don't have a democracy. You have something else, another system. I would call it a tyranny or whatever you want to call it. It's not a democracy. So that's like super obvious. It's playing out in front of everyone, and no one cares and no one does anything about it. And I think the reason is because they're threatened. And if you look at the committee chairmen who allow this shit to happen year after year, they're all, and I don't know, people say, oh, they're compromised, they're being blackmailed, or whatever. I don't have evidence of that, but I know them, and they all have things to hide. I know that for a fact. And so it's not a stretch of imagination to imagine that, some committee chairman who's allowing warrantless spying on Americans to continue, or whatever abuse they're allowing, knowing fully or hiding the truth about UAPs, ignoring the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023, like, why are they doing that? It's not impossible to imagine that some guy with a drinking problem or a weird sex life, and that's very common up there, that's why they're doing it. Because they don't want to be exposed. I don't have evidence of that. I don't have proof of that.
Right.
But that's not a crazy thing to assume that could be happening. And I said to somebody, a very powerful person, the other day in a conversation in my kitchen, an elected official, holds a really senior position, a very famous person. I was going crazy. I was so mad about all this stuff and about the warrantless spying and about the funding for these insane wars. And I said to the guy who serves in one of the legislative bodies, I got so mad my dogs were afraid. They're like, well, why are you yelling? Because I don't yell at home. But I was like, all these people are controlled. They're all, got weird sex lives, and all these things are hiding, and they're being blackmailed by the intel agencies. And he said, and I'm quoting, I know, was like, are we okay? So at this point, we're just sort of admitting that's real. Like, why do we allow that to continue?
The having people compromise thing, God, that's an old story.
It's the old, and but here's the illusion that we fall for time and again. We imagine that evil comes like fully advertised as such. Like evil people look like Anton LaVey.
Horns,
yeah.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Black cloak.
Exactly.
Sickle.
Evil is an independent force that exists outside of people, that acts upon people. I really believe that. I've experienced it. A lot. And it's obvious. And what vessel do they choose? The weak. It's weak men and women who are instruments of evil. The weaker the leader, the more evil that leader will be. So and unfortunately, we've reached a time in American history where every leader is either a woman or a weak man, pretty much. And so I'm sorry to say it, that's just true. And the weaker the leader, that's why Mike Johnson, everyone's like, oh, Mike Johnson's such a nice guy. Well, I know Mike Johnson, and he's a perfectly nice guy to the extent that he's like polite and seems kind of meek and whatever, you know what I mean? He's got like very sort of buttoned down affect, but he's a weak man. And that's the man you should be afraid of.
Yes, to put what he said here in context, when you take a look at this tweet, Tucker Carlson says elected politicians have told him they are terrified of intelligences installing chip on their computers if they speak out insane. Carson suggested the US is not a democracy and is a tyranny instead because US politicians are completely controlled by the intelligence. They are worried about someone putting KDP on their computer. Members of Congress are terrified of the intelligence. They are afraid of the agency. That is not compatible with democracy. Whenever you have unelected people who are not accountable to anyone making the biggest decisions, you don't have a democracy. You have something else. I will call it a tyranny or whatever you want to call it. It's not a democracy. That is Tucker Carlson exposing, bringing the truth to what is going on in this place. At a certain point, when I look at what happened, like someone put this out, another day of Congress not giving a crap about the border. Let's look at numbers. Out of the 95 billion today, 60 billion to Ukraine, 14 billion to Israel, 9 billion Gaza humanitarian support, 8 billion partners in the Indo-Pacific, China deterrent, that is Taiwan. That makes it 135 billion to Ukraine from US in 2 years. That is pretty much the same amount of actual money given to Ukraine in 2 years as we have given to Israel in 76 years, not adjusted to inflation. These are actual numbers. Meanwhile, how much to the US border? That is a question a lot of people are raising on social media. Zero to the US border. In other words, our current Congress is 100% run by early establishment regardless of political party. Unfortunately, Speaker Johnson shows zero backbone to the establishment. All he had to say was zero money to any country until we lock up our border. He has the leverage in negotiations. This was an easy case to negotiate. There is a good negotiation book out there for him to read called Act of the Deal. Very strange set of events. So you will see exactly what is happening. People were disgruntled, like, what is going on? Like, if this included a certain amount of money allocated for the border, I will tell you the truth. You will not see people being agitated like I saw a few years ago. Everyone was angry, expressing dissatisfaction, on what is going on. When I look through, I think about 21 or 19 members of the Republican Party voted against this. Majority of Green, Matt Gaetz, and these are the people that stood up like we cannot continue. What is happening? It therefore means they have to allow the situation to be the way it is. Though I've seen people say Mike Johnson decided to do this because of Israel, things like that. It is actually a big issue